We often don't realize that playwrights and authors spend a good part of their time researching the facts that are necessary to create the stories and the environments that entertain audiences. Today on the Roundtable Perspective, Dr. Jerry Holt joins me in examining the creative process in plays and literature, as well as crime novels and short stories. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. Today I'm joined by my guest, Dr. Jerry Holt, to discuss his novel, The Killing of Strangers, some of the plays that you've written, and maybe more about literature. So welcome, Dr. Holt.
Thank you for having me. Dr.
Holt is a professor in the English department at Purdue Northwest, been teaching here since 2008, got your Ph.D. at University of Oklahoma,
yes.
And been writing both novels and plays and teaching, and got a Fulbright to go to Norway to teach crime novels. So many things we could talk about today. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is maybe ask you to talk about one play in particular, because this week is Jackie Robinson week. It's an anniversary. So, and you did the play Rickey, which has been performed across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you? What prompted you to write that play, and then what is in the play that makes it particularly important for the Jackie Robinson story?
I was living and teaching at that time down along the Ohio River in Portsmouth, Ohio, at Shawnee State University there. And Portsmouth happens to be the hometown of Branch Rickey,
okay,
who, as you well know, is the very garrulous kind of windy manager, owner who so distinguished a lot of baseball in the 1930s and 40s. He created the farm system and quite a few other things, but he's also the person who in 1945 could see Major League Baseball integrating, mm-hmm, and he is the one who brought in a very charismatic fellow named Jackie Robinson. Yes. Now, certainly I'd grown up watching...
You're a baseball fan.
Oh, yeah. I'd grown up loving to watch Jackie Robinson. Mm-hmm. And now that I was in Branch Rickey's hometown, I wanted to know more about him, and I finally decided that the best way, because he talked so much, was to let him just tell his own story. So it became a one-person show. And it
so
featured,
the only character in the play is Branch.
That's correct.
Okay.
And it features, interestingly enough, the famous interview between Rickey and Robinson, where Rickey actually brought him in, which mm-hmm, was very hot at Ebbets Field that day, and was essentially done with an electric fan and nothing else. But that was the day that made the pact between them, and the interesting part of writing the play was I had to give the illusion that Jackie Robinson was on stage and mm-hmm, sitting in a chair during that interview, and that became some of my writing, but mainly the performances of, by now, a series of wonderful actors who have taken on that role and had the depth and ability to make Robinson appear on stage during that sequence. And yes, it went to the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's gone twice. It was there again last year, and it was done at the invitation of the St. Louis Cardinals, because Rickey had a history with them mm-hmm, too. And it's over 10 years old now, and it's just kept going. I'm very proud of that one, and I'm very pleased to have any part at all in celebrating an American hero like Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson. Yes. I think we don't realize sometimes that this was a moment, believe it or not, when a game, baseball, was ahead of everything. 1947, when when Robinson actually came in. That's before the United States military integrated. That's before rock and roll came along and had its effect on a segregated America. That's before Brown versus Board of Education.
Before Colin Kaepernick. I mean, by the very fact that you're on the field makes a political statement and raises things that takes it, as you say, way beyond the sport. You said you were in Portsmouth, so you were doing research on Rickey. I mean, did you find transcripts from other interviews that you incorporated into your play, or did you recreate dialogue that was fictional, so to speak, or how did you navigate that?
Both. However, the best source was there is an immense Rickey archive up at the Ohio State University.
Okay.
And that was a great help to me. And other than that, it was, I had a couple of advantages because I interviewed Rickey's grandson, Branch III. And most wonderfully, I got to interview Rachel Robinson.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. Yeah.
The most delightful person, I think, in my history of doing those kinds of interviews.
Well, I ask because oftentimes creative or fiction is as if someone just kind of pulls it out of thin air and then creates this montage of dialogue. But the thing that strikes me here is that you spent time understanding the climate, understanding the context. I'm assuming understanding even the vocabulary and some of the phraseology that somebody as colorful as Rickey would be using, so it has a certain realness to it. So
I think all of research of this kind anyway is getting to know the people, and writers out there know that once the characters that you want to write about start talking to you, well, that seems something like a condition that ought to be diagnosed. It's not. It's the way the process works.
Yeah, I often hear that when writers say that, even with fictional characters, that they take on a life of their own and they're in contact with them and they talk to them.
And when they won't let you alone, you know you got a book or a play.
So you did the same thing. Let's just talk quickly about a couple more, including the one that you've just finished. But the other one was Ernie Pyle, which is a famous journalist of World War II, and there's also a play about Ernie Pyle. So is this the same, did it transpire in the same way?
Pretty much. Ernie Pyle, of course, has some connections not far from here because in his youthful days he worked for the newspaper over in LaPorte. And he actually sprang from that job to Washington, D.C., where he worked first in the War Office there and then became a correspondent, a stringer as they were called, who would ultimately become the eyes and ears of America during World War II. We have to say this for Ernie Pyle. He never missed the heat of action. He was always there.
Was this also a one person?
Yes, sir.
So is this your modus operandi, so to speak? Because
it seems to be what I keep doing. I should probably be a little more careful of this because one person plays often tend to be kind of hard sells. We kind of assume they're going to be like
a monologue, or
exactly.
And they become not quite engaging, but certainly the Rickey is engaging, and Pyle was a colorful character, so it would seem like that would be as well. So.
Absolutely, and when they take the stage and the actors have the craft to let them do their thing, it's no lecture. You're living what they're living.
So the one now may not be as familiar to our viewers or people, which is Bessie Stringfield, and it's called One Hell of a Ride.
Yeah.
She was a motorcyclist. I guess she was the first black woman to go across the U.S. on a motorcycle, but more famous, I think, was...
First woman, as a matter of fact.
Oh, really?
She went back and forth 9 times. I love this story. At the Beat Nixon Conkey Theater right here in Hammond just did it a couple of weekends ago with a very talented young actress named Joycey Brantley. And she I had the experience of watching somebody become somebody else before my eyes. But yeah, that's the story. Bessie Stringfield was essentially an African-American orphan who grew up in a Catholic orphanage and loved one thing in her life, and that was motorcycles, and specifically Harley Davidsons. And she worked throughout her teen years to get the money for a motorcycle, and once she got it, she was gone.
Yeah.
And she had a system because she followed the carnivals, including, you know, the kinds that used to come right here. And those carnivals tended to have a ride called the Wall of Death.
Oh my,
which is
no, really? That's
exactly
what she did. So she didn't just ride it from coast to coast. She did the.
Oh no, she stopped to do the Wall of Death, and she won an amazing number of those competitions, and that gave her the seed money to stay on the road. And in the evening, she would bunk up with the sideshow people, the Alligator Man, and seemed to be right at home with them.
This notoriety what attracted her to the U.S. Army, because she became as a motorcyclist?
Yes, her skills were needed, and she had them. And then later she was a motorcycle cop as well. So she was somebody whose motorcycle took her to the important places in her life. I love that particular story. And I'm just fascinated by her. And you're right, it's not well known.
Yeah, but the play may make it so, I guess.
I hope so.
Yes, and you've done some other novels, and one that I heard you read from that I guess is still in a stage of being published. But each of the plays that we've talked about leads me to a question, because each of those are stories, right? You've got the Jackie Robinson story, or Branch Rickey, or an Ernie Pyle story. The Bessie story. What makes something a story and it crosses over into a play, which we may call literature, as opposed to just being a story? Because if I tell you a story about my childhood and you take it and work your magic with it in a one-person play, now it's literature. What determines that it's no longer just a story or a narrative and becomes literature or becomes a work of art, as in a play?
I think the key factor is character. You know, when we read history sometimes, it's pretty easy to think we're reading a series of charts and graphs or numbers. You know, when we talk in particular about war dead, those numbers, particularly in something like World War II, are just so immense that we become inured to them. But if you put a person in the middle of this, like Ernie Pyle, for example, that's the difference. That's when one story becomes something else. It is making, the best way I know to say it is to make flesh and blood out of pen and ink. The elements may be all there on the paper, but somebody has got to emerge from there who the reader or the viewer can identify with, and somebody that the person who is perceiving this is going to want to go on a little journey with.
So is that one of the key ingredients? Because many people write many stories, but we don't often think of everything that's written as literature, right? I mean,
not by a long shot.
Right? I mean, you can have a dime novel or you can have a Shakespearean sonnet, and apparently we categorize the different, there's a value system associated with them. But,
well, yes. And then there's that middle ground where somebody takes a genre, for example, even a dime novel, and pushes the envelope to the point.
Like Bret Hart or Stephen Crane or something, that it's, or even, you know, Ragged Rick and Horatio Alger, right? I mean, those are dime novels, but they end up in the American literature lexicon of literature. So.
Yeah, because the envelope was pushed in some way that makes that particular one different.
Well, it strikes me that now, with the way the publishing industry has become more consolidated and shrunk to a large degree, when you talk about a formula, we can think of formulas like detective novels or thrillers, or even for that matter, romance novels. You can almost predict what's going to happen from chapter to chapter. I mean, there's like somebody gave them a template, and I would assume they become bestsellers because readers appreciate that, but I wonder what happens when that mold is is broken?
Well, that's what I wanted to do with the novel The Killing of Strangers. It's got a fact...
Which is a story about Kent State.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's got a fact-based core. It relates to that day in May the 4th of 1970, when the National Guard was placed on the Kent State University campus during a period of heavy war protests, and they started shooting. Right. And the result was 9 wounded and 4 dead. Yes. Because of my age and time in life, perhaps that has always been a very compelling story to me. But I wanted to know if we could take the traditional lens of the private eye novel, which you know perfectly well, that particular lone wolf kind of nearly down and out anti-hero who, like a dog with a bone, grabs something that is bigger than he
against
is.
the authorities and against people that try to get in his way and against all odds.
And anything that means bureaucracy, that's the enemy. But with that, and it's a voice, you know, we generally know well, but with that particular character, have, in this case it was a he, have him investigate the events of Kent State from a framework of 25 years, because my book takes place in 1995, and see what might be turned. And I was lucky because the Nixon tapes.
You had some news source material,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
So you weren't just creating this. Again, you're
no.
using some research and some facts to be able to construct a
I've got
story.
An FBI agent provocateur in the book who I only hoped existed before those tapes. And
well, having lived in that period, I can tell you, yes, they did exist.
Yes.
Maybe not in your story, but actually, yes, they did.
They do,
yeah.
So that was one of those combinations where I tried, you know, I did my research and I tried to do a good history lesson, but at the same time I tried to put it in a format that would lure the reader in as something quite familiar and then become something more like rehearsal for the chaos of the future, you know, rather different. And I'm proud of that book, and I'm very thrilled that it wound up in the Kent State May 4 archive.
Yeah, excellent. Let's shift gears a little bit from what you've been writing and creating to teaching.
Yeah.
You won an outstanding teaching award here at Purdue Northwest, so there must be something great going on in the classroom. But you also ended up with a Fulbright, and you went to Norway to teach crime novels. And my understanding of Norway, the whole Scandinavian country, is they're pretty good at writing crime novels. So
they love them.
Yes.
That's what they do. This is amazing. That's what they do at Easter time, which they celebrate for about 10 days. And they, you know, they're a very happy, kind of wealthy country, and they tend to go to their cabins, and for 10 days they read crime novels.
Celebrate the resurrection of Christ, and we're going to read a crime novel.
Go figure, you know. if the resurrection is the ultimate big mystery, I guess there's some connection. But mainly, that's the time they go, and that's what they do. They read crime novels.
Well, crime novels are, I don't know if I call them crime novels, but certainly thrillers, action adventures are very popular in the United States, like a James Patterson, and previously Robert Parker. And what's the appeal in Norway or Scandinavia or in the U.S.? What's the appeal to the audience to have a crime novel?
Well, I can only talk theory here, but I think it makes a certain amount of sense. The birth of the crime novel goes back to Edgar Allan Poe and all those detectives with the coming of Agatha Christie and so on, who were puzzle solvers, who could take chaotic, violent events and make them make sense through the detective, the ratiocination process. And that kind of changed about the time of World War I with this guy named Dashiell Hammett, I'm sure you know, who saw something different here. He saw a world where the problems were too large, particularly problems that would cause a World War I. And so he began to put detective figures, that down and out figure we talked about earlier, who want to solve the problem, but are encountering a problem that's too big. So how do you find justice? How do you walk those mean streets? How do you do something worth doing to help people in those situations? You usually wind up making a small contribution, but the reality of whatever we call the horror out there remains exactly that. You mentioned Parker.
The bureaucracy, the corruption, right?
Yeah.
So his justice is for perhaps the individual in that particular case.
Exactly, and it may not conform to legal patterns at all. You mentioned Parker and Spencer.
Yes.
Spencer was very good at finding those ways to make some small difference in a world gone mad.
To what extent does the crime novel differ in Scandinavia than in the U.S.? I don't know. I mean, I've read Joe Nesbo and some of the others, and it seems like they're more, I don't know, they seem to be more developed with their characters. There seems to be more social commentary, whereas often the U.S. seems to be more direct action, so that it can easily be translated to the big screen in some action movie. Is that a fair assessment, or is that just my bad reading?
No, the crime novel is, of course, another mirror to which we see society. And the great thing about that genre is you can talk about anything. Any social issue, any political issue, any hot button topic, all form the basis of that human endeavor called crime. And in Norway, they get that pretty well, and they tend to let their policemen do the solving. Their policemen, like Harry Hula, are sometimes bent and, you know.
They may be drunkards, they may be
Exactly.
bad dads, but they get the job done eventually.
Yeah. Here we do tend to prefer the lone wolf, the private investigator. However, Norway's got one of those who's just the best, about 20 books in now, and his name is Gunnar Stolesen, and he writes the Varg Vium novels. Varg's also a television series, which is now airing on Sunday nights on another channel. But Vium is pretty close to America's...
Are those translated into English?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty close to America's Raymond Chandler, the Philip Marlowe character. And one of the first things I got to do when I went over there, because I'd gotten to know him on email and Stolesen had read my book, was to go down the city of Bergen, where those stories take place, has a Varg Vium bar, where you talk mystery and crime. And I was to meet Stolesen down there for the first time. And I walked down there, it's on the harbor, and the fog was just coming off the harbor. And
sounds like a perfect crime novel setting.
Through the fog comes Gunnar. And we went ahead to have, I think, probably the most informative and delightful evening of my life.
Wow. So does he write his novels the way that you have written your plays? I mean, does he do the research so that he knows how police procedures are, and if you're on the dock, knows how the stevedores do their work, or is it?
You have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, that's the grit that you need to feel under your fingernails when you're reading one of those books. Anybody who's going to succeed in that genre has to make you feel the mean streets.
Let's. The time goes quickly when we're doing these, but I wanted to end with a kind of a larger question, which you've been doing as your career in addition to writing is. Why do we care about literature? Why should universities have literature courses? Why should the average citizen be interested in literature, beyond the titillation you might get from a crime novel or something else? What's the social value of having literature as a, I don't know, an art form, I guess?
I think it's because we don't want Ray Bradbury to be right about Fahrenheit 451. We don't want that to happen. And we know good and well that on any campus, the beating heart of humanities is always going to be the literature department. Study of literature is a study of life. And everything that we confront on a daily basis gets its rehearsal right in there. Everybody you would talk to out there someplace has a book which changed her or his life back there someplace, and it probably came in a literature course. We don't ever want to lose that connection, and I pray to God we do not.
That'd be an interesting question to ask at the end of each literature course, to ask students if there was a book in this class that has had an impact on you. Or after you've, I don't know if you know it at the time. You may know it at the time. Sometimes it's almost like an epiphany. Oh my God, now everything makes sense.
Yeah.
Or it may come later when you're starting to realize you've drawn lessons from a particular author of how you make your value system or how you might live your
You said
daily
that
life.
very well.
Yeah. Dr. Holt, we run out of time real quick, and that's all the time we have on our program today. I want to thank Dr. Holt for joining me on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Lee Artz. See you next time.